Welcome, friends. Today at his church, we are celebrating friends. We're celebrating friendship. The theme of friendship is throughout the book of Proverbs, with the word friend actually used 10 different times. From these verses in Proverbs, we learn that there are two kinds of friends. There is the friend who is there because they feel like you have something to offer, like material gifts or popularity by association. But the other type of friend is the one who is there because of their genuine love and support. Proverbs 18, verse 24 tells us, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. That is the type of friendship we're celebrating today. If you have a friend like that, you're blessed. And more importantly, if you are that type of friend to someone else, we want to honor you today. Luke chapter 7, verse 34 tells us something very interesting about Jesus. That he was a friend. He was a friend. He was a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Now, I've never spent much time being a tax collector. I have had a considerable amount of time being a sinner, though. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Anybody real in the house? All right. But Jesus was a friend to people that not everybody wanted to be friends with. He was a friend to sinners. He's been a friend to me. How many of you have known him to be a friend to you? And he's been a friend to me, not because I'm a friend to him and we're friends, not because of material blessings that he gives me, not because I just want to be associated with someone important. But really the reason we are friends is because while I was a sinner, he loved me, gave his life for me, he saved me. And I plan on being friends with Jesus forever. Anybody else feel that way? Amen. Praise God. Let's give him thanks and praise. The amazing thing is he's here today. Amen. As we considered a guest speaker for our Celebrate Friends service, we thought it would be great to hear from someone in our community rather than one of our teaching pastors. So I asked Letitia to prayerfully consider someone that could come and speak to us from our community. Well, she obviously is a great woman of faith. She invited the Bloomington chief of police, and he accepted. And although we're not in Bloomington today, those of you that may not be aware, this church was founded in Bloomington in 1974 and is the location of our offices and what will be our newly renovated and rebranded Community Enrichment Center at 88th and Nicollet. We're excited about the new launch of our Celebrate Recovery ministry that will be offered there. Celebrate Recovery is a faith-based program that offers support and guidance to those that are struggling with addictions and a host of other problems. We do want to hold services there again, church services, I guess you would say, but right now our focus is on using that building for a place that could be, and I know sometimes this phrase is overdone, but I mean it in the sincerest sense that we want it to be a spiritual hospital and an education center so that people's lives in our community can be changed forever. And so I'm honored to have our guest speaker here today. His list of accomplishments is great. Police Chief Booker Hodges has worked as a school resource officer, patrol deputy, narcotics detective, SWAT operator. Be careful. Patrol overnight watch commander, inspector, undersheriff, acting chief deputy, and assistant public safety commissioner, and now our chief of police. Prior to joining the Bloomington Police Department in April of 2022, he served with Minnesota Department of Public Safety, Prior Lake Police Department, not too far from here, and the Ramsey and Dakota County Sheriff's Office. He has led agencies ranging from 40 to 1,500 staff members. He earned his doctorate from Hamline University. He is married and has 2 sons, and they were going to be here, except his boys are obviously good baseball players. They won a game they weren't supposed to win, evidently, and so they're not able, but we do hope to meet them in the future at some time, his wife Lorinda and his sons Booker and Soren. So without any further delay, we want to welcome today as our speaker at his church a man that WCCO has said is a rising star among law enforcement professionals. Would you welcome Booker T. Hodges?
Thank you so much for having me here today. NT is very persistent. My assistant said she's not taking no for an answer. So, so I figured, God had a reason for me to be here today. And so I'm going to start off by saying that every time someone introduces me, you go through all this list of accomplishments. It's real easy to see the crown, but behind every crown is a cross, right? And so for me, every time I hear these things, it's a reminder, right, of everything I've had to go through to get to where I'm at. And I'm pretty sure everybody in here is the same way. You will never see a true crown without a cross. And for me, I'll just briefly start off talking a little bit about myself. It's not about me today. I do have something that I do want to share, but just briefly about me and my relationship with God. We were raised Lutheran, and when I was 12 years old, my mom died. And at that point, my mom and dad were involved in a domestic violence relationship, and my dad killed my mom. And at that point, I was done with God, right? But God wasn't done with me. I ended up working in camps in the Boundary Waters for 7 years. That kept me out of trouble during school time, during high school. I grew up, born and raised in North Minneapolis. My senior year in high school was the Murder-apolis year where 95-something people had gotten killed in Minneapolis. And if it wasn't for me being able to work in the Boundary Waters, I don't know what would have happened. Now, I spent that whole time in the Boundary Waters working at a church camp and doing everything I could to reject God. I mean, every time I heard God's name, I was just completely turned off. But again, he was not done with me, even though I was done with him. So long story short, he's really shown me throughout my life that he's always there. And he's always there for those of us who want to have a relationship with him. And I mean, true relationship. And I say this to a lot of believers. I just have everybody ask this question. What is your relationship like with Jesus? I mean, do you tell him everything? Or do you tell him what he wants to hear? Or you think he wants to hear? And for me, the faith journey, the person you see before you today is someone who has had to endure a lot of crosses. It's someone who has been sometimes ignorantly obedient, right? Meaning, when I mean ignorantly obedient, I mean where I was following what he wanted me to do, even though I didn't know that's what he wanted me to do. But it's one of these things where I always say to everybody is we have to have a relationship with Christ as individuals, not just here in group settings. So what I'll spend a bulk of my time here today, and I'm just going to briefly talk about this passage in Luke and ask people a couple of questions, because I don't think everybody wants to sit and listen to me talk forever today. So I'm going to just start in Luke 24:13. And this is, for most people, everybody knows their Bibles, right? So it's after Jesus has been crucified and he's risen. So just take this in the context that the disciples at this time, obviously, the Lord had died, and for them, they thought he was going to come back and triumph over Israel and their view of the world, right? And I would encourage everybody, too, to reread the Gospels. This is one thing that I've been really focused on lately in my own personal prayer life, is because a lot of times we get too familiar with the Gospels, and you read them, and you just kind of glance over, I heard that story before, and you don't really pay attention, and a lot of times God will give you something that's a little different. And he put this on me, and this is one of the things in the community that I wish we could really think about. So I'll just start in Luke 13, and I'm going to read from 13 to 16, and then I'll skip ahead to 30 to 32, and I'm going to go into that. Now, behold, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they talked together all the things which had happened. So it was, while they were conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were restrained, so they did not know him. Could you be talking to God and your eyes be restrained and you not know him? Imagine if we conducted ourselves as a people and as a community where we treated everybody that we were talking to like we could be talking to God and might not know him. Would that text message you send be the way that you want it? Would that like on Facebook be the way that you want it? Would that comment in a newspaper article be the way that you want it? Would you treat that person the same way if you knew that you were talking to Jesus? And again, I go back to what he said. Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were restrained, so they did not know him. And the rest of the verse here goes on to where they're telling Jesus about his story, right? So you're going to educate God on his story, right? That's kind of how people we do, right? And what they expected to happen. But if you go down to 30, Luke 24:30, and I'm reading out of New King James. Now it came to pass, he sat at the table with them, and he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them, that their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, did not our heart burn within us? He talked with us on the road and while he opened the scriptures to us. So think about this. The minute he revealed himself, he vanished. But they went back and they said to one another, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road? And I asked this question, are we too busy in our world to pay attention to our hearts? So not only did he restrain their eyes from what they could see, but he didn't restrain their hearts, right? And in society today, our lives are ran by this device here, right? And does this convey our hearts? I mean, you think about this. Every single thing in our lives is put on this phone right here. Even a Bible, right? That's why I still go old school, right? Right? But when you think about this, could you be talking to God and not know it because you're too busy to pay attention, right? And as a society, God is talking to us. He talks to us as individuals. But my message here today is, are we too busy to hear him? And in my job, I can tell you throughout my career, I've seen when you really talk to some of these people who are involved in some of these instances, God has given them warnings. They were too busy doing what they were doing to hear him. And as a society, I think sometimes, especially in the church, we have to slow down and really try to hear God. And I don't think we do that enough. I mean, it's easy to love people who are like us. But, Jesus said, love your enemies. Right? And you ask, and I jokingly say this, but I think it's true. Why did he say that? Well, because quite frankly, you want to love your enemies because they don't want to mess with a child of God. Right? And so, and it's one of those things where we just have to really start to focus and get back to our basic humanity. So, and that's my message today is, you could be talking to God, you could be talking to Jesus, and your eyes could be shut. He could shut your eyes to who he is. But he didn't shut their hearts. They were just too busy telling him his story to listen to it, right? And you think about most of our prayers, when people pray, how often do you take the time to listen? Or are we telling God everything he already knows? Right? You think God don't know you need a bill paid? Right? That might be part of your cross, right? I mean, you think God don't know you need healing? Right? God knows all this stuff, right? But we need to listen to him as a society. And one of the biggest things in the church, and I'm going to close on this and I'll take any questions that people have, is judgment. Judgment belongs to God. It does not belong to me. It does not belong to you. And the only difference between, and I tell my officers this all the time, the only difference between us and the people that we hand orange jumpsuits to is decision making. We are no better people than they are. We just happen to make better decisions than they do. That's it. But as a church, we can't be judgmental. Because a lot of times when you're talking to people, everybody has a church story, right? Everybody has a church story, right? And if that church story is, when I was down, they judged me, that wrecks people for life. And it takes a lot for people to overcome that. And that's why for me, even when I do my press conferences, it's never about the person, it's always about their behavior. Because I am no better than them, I just make better decisions. And that's only through his grace. Because all my life I haven't made great decisions. I've just been smart enough to listen and hear God. And that's, listening to God is something that I think we all could do a better job of, and realizing that God may shut our eyes, but he doesn't shut our hearts. And I will close on this. Like, my career, I started with an agency, and I thought I'd stay there, right? I mean, I've been married to the same woman for, God, 18 years. so I'm a loyal person, right? But I never thought I would leave that agency, but the Lord said something different, right? And I listened, right? I don't, there's a lot. Every time he told me to go somewhere, I've gone. But I made sure that it was him telling me to do that by keeping my mouth shut and actually listening to what he had to say to me. And that's one thing I would just encourage us to do, is when we're dealing with people, just imagine if that was God and he shut your eyes from seeing that it was him, and try to deal with people on a heart-to-heart level, because that's ultimately where God operates. And if we operate there, we could have a lot better society than what we have today. So with that, I'll take any questions anybody has today. Oh, someone's got some question about, what about arrest or so? I don't know. Yes, sir. Well, the city of Bloomington, we got a phenomenal community. I mean, man, we got a phenomenal, diverse community. And let me say this. The city of Minneapolis is 38% diverse. Bloomington is 33% diverse. Right, so this notion that these suburban communities are all one way is just simply not true. Our biggest issue right now, I'd say, is primarily opioids. I mean, we're really dealing with these opioids and everything that goes around it. People stealing for it, people doing crimes for it. And the thing about opioids is there's two physically addictive drugs, make your bodies physically addicted to them. It's alcohol and opioids, so like fentanyl, heroin, all that stuff. So like, say I smoke marijuana, right? My body is not going to have a physical reaction if I stop smoking marijuana. But if I'm using fentanyl, my body is going to have a physical reaction for me not to use that. So what happens is and it's very smart, the part of drug dealers is they put the physically addictive fentanyl in things like crack and meth. Because if I get you physically hooked, I got you both physically and mentally, and you'll always be a customer. So, I mean, that's something that we're all dealing with as a society right now. And then, Bloomington's a little different than some of the surrounding communities. I mean, by and large, people in Bloomington respect the law, and people don't go out and do a lot of stuff that you see in some of these other places. But it's just that opioid piece that we're all going to struggle with for a while as a society until we figure out something with that. Yes, sir. So yeah, in the community, I always say prayer and protection for our city and our state and our police officers. And I say pray for those in leadership, right? Every single person in a leadership position is there because God put them there. I mean, he put Pontius Pilate there, right? Every single person that's in one of those positions. And I can tell you, my job is lonely, right? And part of my cross is the Lord shed a lot of stuff from me to really make me be dependent on him, right? And I think sometimes people in leadership don't share this enough because, oh, God, the leader wants, sympathy. Oh, God, you just got the nice office and the salary and blah, 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 right? Boo-hoo, cry me a river, right? But it's it's lonely, right? I mean, and that's it's lonely, and that's why we jokingly say police chiefs, we age in dog years. So, but just that prayer and protection is what we all need as a society. Yes, sir. Oh, in Bloomington, absolutely. I mean, the community is phenomenal, and the community supports their police department, right? And it's not blind support. Let me be clear on that. It's not blind support. If we do something that we shouldn't do, I don't expect the community to support us, right? But at the end of the day, our core value is respect, and we're going to treat everybody with respect. But the community supports their police, and it helps. It helps us with our recruiting. It helps us with we're a fully staffed police department, right? And I can say this, we're the only large police department that's fully staffed in the state of Minnesota. So, I mean, it's something that, that support really helps with that.
One of our growth groups has community services visited the park group that's at a fire station.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that go over well with the police and the force that we could show some actual appreciation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the cops are people too, right? Everybody likes support, right? We'll take it. So I joke around a lot. So life is short. Oh yeah, but no, we'll take it. Yes, sir.
How do you view the church in light of community like regrowth or community recovery or healing in regards to like the police in the city? Like what role do you see the church playing in that?
So, and I'm glad I think the reason God really sent me here today was to hear about what you're trying to do on that campus on Nicollet. So he asked, like, what role do I see for the church? And I think this is a church, but I think it's also a faith piece too, because we do have, brothers and sisters who are Muslim and whatnot. The role is really to be there to support these people in a non-judgmental way and to provide them a space to where they can heal, right? And a lot of times in churches and faith groups, unfortunately, people think they have to be perfect, right? And we all know we're only led by one perfect person, and that's none of us, right? So, I mean, it's one of those things when people come, they're going to make mistakes, right? There's going to be resets. But that's the role I see, is to be able to provide that space with the full understanding of this. And I get in trouble when I say this, but God's got me. Is that if external pressure, right, external we get from people outside of us, was very effective, rehab would be 100% successful, right? When you talk to most people who've overcome addiction, it's something that clicks in here with them. Our job is just to provide them the space to allow that to happen, right? We can't pressure them to do it because it's just not gonna, like I said, if it worked, rehab would be 100% successful. Yes, sir.
Is there like a time or a situation, where like throughout your law enforcement career, where like there's one where like there's no doubt that God got you out of there or out through that situation, like something that, like one of those life experiences that leaves you with like no doubt that like God's watching over you?
Oh, yes, God, I've had plenty of those, and some might not be appropriate to share in a church, but yeah, I've had plenty. And I'll say the one where God really, and it's not like an action-packed deal, where God really spoke to me, right, in the spirit. Didn't hear the voice, it was just, and I've heard God's voice twice in my life, but this wasn't one, it was in the spirit. It was when I was in Dakota County and I had contemplated quitting law enforcement altogether. Like I was done. And God, and it was only God that came to me and put in my spirit that, nah, this is your purpose, this is where I got you. And understand that your cross is a builder of faith. And the minute that happened, things laid in place, and I was out of there in 6 months. So for me, that it was a huge moment, right? And again, that cross really is just a builder of faith when we recognize its purpose, right? And that's, so for me, that's what, I'll leave the action-packed ones out for that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there still a lot of disconnect between officers and civilians like there were a few years ago? A lot of officers were even scared to pull people over.
Yeah. Police. Yeah. In some communities, yes. In Bloomington, no. In Bloomington, we really never had to. I mean, there was a little bit of that, but it really wasn't that big of a deal in terms of the way it was in other places, right? And this is one thing I told my cops when I first got here is just because you see something happening someplace else doesn't mean it happens here, right? And my dad's famous line was, just because your neighbor gets a divorce don't mean you have to, right? And it's one of those things where, we've had a great police department that's had a history of treating people with respect. Does that mean we're perfect? Absolutely not. But by and large, we have a lot of community support. And the profession overall, I think, is still supported, right? Even though sometimes people put it in the media that it's not. But understand that division makes money, right? I mean, division makes money. Whenever you can sow a conflict, people are going to buy a newspaper. People are going to click on it, right? And that's why I go back to what I said earlier. If the person on the other end was God and he hid himself from you, would you be clicking to look at some of this stuff, right? Or comment on some of this stuff, right? But by and large, we've been blessed to have community support. I'm not naive enough to know that it's something that we have to continuously do every day and make sure that we treat people with respect, period. But the profession, it's a great job, but right now, I'm just going to be honest with you all. I do share a worry about the status of law enforcement, not only in Minnesota, but in the country. And as a profession, are we perfect? No. Have people abused people in other areas? Yes. But law enforcement is necessary, right? And it's incumbent upon us to make sure we're doing what we need to do. But at the end of the day, we are a people-based organization. Robots can't do our jobs, right? And what's happened now is the status of our recruitment and retention of officers, not only locally and nationally, is at a crisis level. And if you knew me, you would know I don't use that term lightly, but we are. And what's started to happen now is America as a country, we're having a demographic shift, right? You're going to be a minority-majority country here by 2040. Minnesota, we've seen it a little bit, but by and large, we've still resisted some of it. But with that being said, it's just like education. If the new people of color are being taught that this is a bad profession, just like education, you're not demographically going to have enough people that are going to want to fill these jobs, right? And what's going to happen is communities that can afford to pay police officers astronomical salaries, right, are going to have police officers, and communities that can't won't. Right? And I mean, in Minneapolis, for example, I never thought that I would see the day where a law enforcement person would make football player money, $300-something thousand a year. Right? That's football player money, basketball player money. But in the future, if you can't recruit, that's what's happening now. Everybody's salary is just going up and up and up and up, right? And that's not sustainable. So we got to make sure that we're telling people and getting people to do this job, because I still believe law enforcement is the most noble profession on the face of the earth. I have fun at this job every single day, you know, and it's a good job, right? And in media, you know, sometimes you just, but this bill is going to come due in about 5 years, and it's going to be problematic. And we've already seen communities where this has happened. In law enforcement, I say we don't prevent crime, we deter it. And the significant crime increase that you're seeing after 2020 was there was no deterrent factor there, right? So now we're starting to get back to where there's a deterrent factor in place. But when you don't have people to deter these crimes, this is what's going to happen. And unfortunately, who are the people who are most often victimized by this? And for me, my focus has always been on victims, because I don't want people to get victimized. But that's my worry right now for us as a profession and as a society, because if people don't want to do these jobs, I'm not going to work forever. I'm 46, right? I got 9 years left to go. And being a police officer is a young person's game, right? Out there humping a squad car, you know. They hired me for my brains. I got, you know. I mean, I can still do the job, but, you know, do I do it as good as I did 10 years ago? No, right? So, but it's one of these things where it's a profession. It's not just law enforcement, it's education, too, where we're going to see these significant issues if we don't do something about it now. That's a good question. He asked, how do you know when it's God speaking? For me, it's always, I can tell you like how I know when God's talking to me, right? It's always when I'm really focused and can hear him, right? And I mean, what I mean by focus is no distractions, right? So if I ever want to really hear from God, I do everything I can to wash my mind and remove all distractions. So even if it takes me 30 minutes of sitting there getting every stupid thought out of my head, like you got to change the toilet paper, you got to, all the stuff that comes in your head when you're sitting here trying to clear your mind, right? And that's worked for me. And, you know, when you really pray these things too, even if you don't get the voice, you can get it in your spirit, but also, you know, God sends people to you. And he'll send things to you, too, to show that it's him. And, you know, I always encourage people, and this is just from my life lesson, your prayer might not be answered. It might not look the way you wanted it to look. Right? And that's, you know, and I say before I took this job, you know, I wanted to go back, because I was the assistant commissioner at the state, and I wanted to go back to being a police chief, so I put in for a job in Pensacola. I love Florida. You hear me? Me and my family, we love Florida. But before that, we were in Pensacola, and, you know, there's some things that God had shown us. I mean, really nice people. People had done some things that you were just like, whoa, only God had done this, right? So I put in for the job, and I finished one, and I was like, yes, I'm going to Florida. And they didn't pick me, right? And I'm like, oh, man, what, God, you told me to do this. When he said, I didn't tell you would get it, right? So, and you know, with that, when I put in for Bloomington, I put in for this job literally on the last day. I mean, it took that much praying for me, and I literally cleared my mind, and he said, put in for it. He didn't tell me I was going to get it, right? So I put in for it, and I got it. and I'm here talking to you all. So it's funny how it works. But yeah, just clear your mind. The toughest thing to do is to clear your mind to be able to hear from God. Right.
How do you see the legalization of marijuana affecting our community and state from a professional standpoint?
Ooh, boy. All right. Well, so when I was at the state, I was in charge of writing this up for the governor's office on the public safety side, and I said there's no public safety argument to legalize cannabis, either from a law enforcement standpoint or a medical standpoint. And the health folks are all in agreement with this too. It's just something that they wanted to do. I think, you know, what you've seen in other communities that have done this is home grow in poor communities. People will rent out homes and just completely destroy them by growing marijuana in them. Because at the end of the day, marijuana is a commodity, right? It's still something that people are going to make money off of. So poor communities, people will rent out houses, grow marijuana. Growing marijuana, you know, you get the mold in the walls. It's going to destroy the homes. And then the fire piece to it is there's a chemical process they use to extract the THC to make gummies and all this other stuff, right? So it's just the illicit market. And then from a law enforcement standpoint, the driving piece, we don't have a test for it. So we're still trying to figure that out. And from an employment piece, the way the law is written, if I had an officer right now, this is the way I interpret this, who went to the medical marijuana program because they were having some brain health issues or needed help with anxiety, they could consume cannabis if they were in the medical marijuana program. And the way I read that is anybody other than your federal sensitive people like the truck drivers could consume cannabis if they were in the medical marijuana program. So it's just something we're going to have to deal with, and people in apartment buildings, I'm pretty sure you're going to be dealing with a lot of smell issues, and that's going to be the biggest complaint I think we're going to see in law enforcement is people calling saying that people in these apartment buildings are smoking weed all the time. So we'll see. Yeah. Legislature is the best governing body in the country, but God put them there for a reason, is what I keep telling myself. So all right, I think I'm done now. So thanks for having me.